Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri fantasyart.com, and today I'm actually just going to be finishing up the panel here because most of these tools I wouldn't actually recommend that you use, or I would recommend that you purely use the keyboard shortcuts for them. There's several reasons for that. The main one is to build up your speed for your drawing time. If you're able to use the keyboard shortcuts, that significantly reduces the amount of time that you're wasting having to find the icons and switch through them as you go. The last tool that we covered was actually the sponge tool, and that was related to the dodge and the burn tool as well. There are additional tools which allow you to do vectorized art. As such, I don't recommend you use any of the vectorizing tools in Photoshop. I automatically recommend that you use the ones in Illustrator. The ones in Illustrator, they work a lot easier. The workflow is a lot faster in general. I automatically recommend that you switch to a vector-based software. The reason for that is those softwares are designed to handle the information much better. It's much more cleaner in general for the workspace, and you have a lot more options related to that. The only other time you would not use a vector-only or mainly concentrated vector-based software would be if you're using Indesign. Indesign is actually a software that's essentially a hybrid between Photoshop and Illustrator, so it's able to handle actual JPEGs, PNGs a lot more efficiently, as well as vector-based information. Now, InDesign is specifically normally used for books, brochures, anything that has to combine graphics along with text. Normally, I actually personally use Illustrator for those purposes just because I like the tools that are made available to me, but there are some added benefits to using a software like InDesign. So these four tools that you see here are actually designed purely for vector-based uses. So they include the pen tool, which is subdivided into additional tools, which include the freeform pen tool, the add anchor point tool, the delete anchor point tool, and convert point tool. Now, if you're using a software like Illustrator, essentially, if you wanted to manipulate the angles of your lines, it's a lot easier to do because you essentially just hit one button and it allows you to do that automatically. Here, you'd have to play around with the different buttons to find out the proper settings to do that. You can easily manipulate the path selections and the direction using these two tools called the path selection tool and the direct selection tool. Your text is automatically included in here. For this, I would just actually use the keyboard shortcut for this. The keyboard shortcut for the text tool, as defaulted by Photoshop, is by hitting T. Now, it does require a bit of time to load up, but essentially you get all this information plus some added information on the top here of your menu bar. So if you go in here, you can change your orientation of your text, etc. It's a lot easier to do these changes via this bar and just using the keyboard shortcut, which is simply hitting the T button. Now, you also have additional tools that are also, once again, vector-based. You can create a rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, a line tool, and custom shape tool. Once again, I don't use any of these tools. I essentially normally use the Marquee Tool and simply fill in the colors using that. Now, there's a couple of reasons why. I'm just going to load this back up here and move it up so you can see. So this is actually a path that I created for this. And as you can see, it's very simple. It's very cubic. But in order to change the color, I have to actually go into different settings in order to do that. Try changing it in red. You could see that it doesn't automatically refill this. And if I have any modifications that I don't want to have to resize, I have to actually rasterize this vector mass in order to essentially create a flattened image version. So because it wastes a lot of time for me to use this, I don't use this tool. These tools are beneficial though if you're trying to create an object that you need to be able to resize without losing any details. So text is a very good example. That's probably the only tool in these 4 options here that I actually use is the text option here. And that's only because it's easier to work with. Now you also have a 3D rotation tool. Essentially these are all for 3D objects that you've imported as an OBJ file. So if you're trying to paint or move the object around, you can easily do that in Photoshop. There's also the camera rotations that you can set up in Photoshop as well. Now, I don't personally use these features just because it's very heavy on the computer. I actually tend to use Zbrush or Mudbox instead for this purpose. Zbrush is nice because it doesn't require as much of a powerful computer in order to function. That's one of its biggest attributes, is the fact that it doesn't require specialized computer design in order to actually function correctly. The problem with using softwares like Mudbox or Maya is that in order to fully benefit from the software or to increase its running speed once it hits a certain ratio, you need to have certain cards in place. Otherwise, it doesn't handle the information correctly. Now, the hand tool and the rotate view tool, you don't need to actually click this button in order to activate it. I do highly recommend you get used to using this as a keyboard shortcut only, because you're going to save a lot of time. So if I switch back to my selection tool, as you can see, if I want to move this image, all I have to do is hold down the space bar and it allows me to move my image in my canvas. So that's a very simple keyboard shortcut you should be used to using if you're doing a lot of work in Photoshop or you're doing a lot of drawing. Another tool that was underneath that was the rotation tool. You can activate that just by clicking the R key on your keyboard, and that automatically brings the little hand with the little rotation on it. And at this point I can rotate it in whichever direction I wish, and if I ever need to reset it, I just go to the top here and hit reset. I can also set it to specific angles. Now, when you're using this tool, it's not actually going to save the image itself as this orientation. So it's not like you were flipping the object or doing a 90-degree rotation of the object. That is not the case in this. You're purely doing this as a means to temporarily rotate your canvas so that it's easier to use. So these changes are not permanent. Now you also have the magnifying glass here. Once again, you should get used to using a keyboard shortcut for this. You need to get used to it because it does save a lot of time. Essentially, if you hold down the control key and you press the plus key, it zooms in. If you press the minus key, it zooms out. So this is a really easy way to switch in and out of your image without losing any information. These 2 keys are essentially extremely important to know by heart. It does take a while, but it's definitely worth the time that you invest in this. Now, I'm just going to go through a little bit more details on the rotation tool. As you notice, there's very few options here, but what you can do is you can actually either type in the rotation that you want to rotate, or you can actually click and drag on here in the little circle, and it will interactively rotate the image as well. You can also choose to rotate all of the windows. Okay, some additional things that you might want to be aware of as well in Photoshop, especially in the main interface area. You can actually change the value here. So if I right click here, I can actually change between pixels, inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, picas, and percentages. Pixels are really useful if you're doing essentially web design and the pixel information is more important to you. Inches is generally better for printing purposes because most Canadian printers and American printers use inches as their values that they prefer for printing. Centimeters and millimeters, you can actually use these more if you're actually trying to get a more accurate scale reference for an image or where an object might be inside of an image. So I would change these settings if you're actually trying to do a size comparison between two portions in an image. These are more functional when you're actually using the analysis menu on the top here. Points, I haven't yet found a usefulness for that. Picas, however, are extremely useful once again for printing. You would normally use percentages if you're trying to actually increase, decrease, or interactively compare different percentages of an image. So you could use this potentially for web design, but I actually prefer using pixels because pixels is generally a standard for any website design. So I don't normally use the percentage at all. And once again, if you want to show or hide your ruler here, just hold down Control R and it will hide it. If you hold down Control and hit R again, it will re-show it. So that's it for this week's tutorial, and I hope to see you guys soon. So thank you and take care.